Know me, my name is Brian Pengelly. I'm the youth ministry lead here at the church. And one of the great things about working with youth is that you get constant doses of humility as they remind you of the fact that you are old and you don't know anything. My previous church that I was ministering at when I was working with the youth, I was going through a very busy season in my life. At the time, I was not actually in paid ministry. I was volunteering as the youth leader there. On top of that, I was going to school full-time at Humber College to get my CYW diploma. And I was working full-time overnights at a youth detention facility. And so life was obviously at a very hectic pace for those 2 years that I was in school and working at the same time. And I would come Sunday morning, I would do an overnight shift, and then I would go directly to church and teach the junior high Sunday school class. And I would show up in class, and I always tried to spend time at the start of each class talking to the different students and getting to know them, see how they're doing. And as I was standing out in the hallway greeting students as they're coming in, there was one student, Justice, who I just loved, but God has given him a gift of just saying things very bluntly. And I was like, hey, how are you doing? And he's like, I'm good. How are you doing? And then before I could even answer, he said, and don't say tired or stressed, because you say that every week, and I just know it's true, and you might as well just tell me that you're breathing. I was like, oof. And I came to realize, like, wow, I know I have been this way, and I've been talking about this, but that had actually come to overcome everything that I started every conversation with. I'm so tired right now. I'm so stressed right now. And it became kind of like a broken record player for me. So this week, I took some time. Saturday is usually my day off because obviously I work on Sundays. So I went home and I visited my parents, and I went home to the comfort of mom and dad who know me and love me better than anyone else in my life. And I told them quite proudly that I was preaching this Sunday, and they always like to know that so they can try and listen in on the service. It might not work this week, but which is good so I can talk about them. But I told my mom that I was preaching. She said, oh, what are you speaking on? And my answer was the importance of the Sabbath rest. And my loving mother's response was, ha! Because she knows me. So let's be honest here. I am not preaching this sermon because I am the one who has it all together and will impart the wisdom of the ages onto you, the people. I am saying I am a person who struggles with this. Rest does not come natural to me. I like being busy. And as much as I'll say, like, oh, I'm so busy, I wish I could slow down, I'm actually not happy unless I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off. There is a comfort in my life in being busy that I have found. And I find that I'm a person who, even when if I hit a space where I'm not doing a lot of different things, that's my cue that I start signing up for more things. So I can get my life back into that energy of being busy. I enjoy riding the adrenaline wave of things a lot of the time. We live in a culture that encourages busyness. We live in a culture where it is expected that we will have lots of things on the go. And so then even when we try and relax, we find ways to turn our relaxation into work. Have you ever met someone whose hobby becomes a full-time job? So I have one friend, and he's really into, his way of relaxing is running. God bless him, not me. Should I switch to a handheld? I'm getting lots of, okay. So running became his hobby, and this was his thing he was going to do to relax, to take some of the stress out of his life. And it started off good, getting up, half an hour early and going for a walk around the block and appreciating nature. But the next thing you know, then it wasn't a walk, he was running with a group. And then the next thing you know, he got an app on his phone to measure how many footsteps he went and how far he went, and it became a competition to see how much further he could go each day. And then the next thing I know, he's signing up for half marathons and waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to run. And then he started doing things where he's climbing through the mud, going over barbed wire fences, jumping over fires. And I'm like, is this relaxing at this point? I have another friend who is into video games. And that was his thing. He played video games. And so he signed up for World of Warcraft. And he was playing that with some friends, and it was all great. But then the next thing you know, and I'm going to lose a lot of you here, but he's doing level, 80 raids with 40 other people. And when I'm calling him up saying, hey, want to hang out this weekend? He's like, oh, I would really love to get together, but I can't because my group has a raid tonight. And I'm like, wait a minute, so what was this supposed to be a relaxing hobby, and now suddenly it's sounding like homework, like I want to do things, but I can't because we do this, even our hobbies, even the things that are supposed to help us relax, so often turn into work for us. And then we think about how much work we have to get done, and we think that, oh, I'm supposed to be resting, I'm supposed to be relaxing, and then we feel guilty about not relaxing enough. And well, there's nothing relaxing about guilt. And it just becomes a cycle. But in the beginning, it wasn't this way. Genesis chapter 2 tells the story. It's actually a summary after having just told the whole story of creation, of how God created the worlds, and a beautiful piece of poetry. And then in Genesis chapter 2, it begins to sum up the previous chapter, and it says this: heaven and earth were finished, down to the last detail. By the seventh day, God had finished his work. On the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it a holy day, because on that day he rested from his work. All the creating he had done. This is the story of how it all started, of heaven and earth when they were created. Now, this is a passage that I grew up with hearing, and this was kind of drilled into my mind that on the seventh day God rested. But I always had a hard time wrapping my brain around this. What does it mean that God rested? Does it mean that he was so tired from creating the universe that he was out of breath and God was, oh wow, I need to take a nap. I can't handle making any more stuff. Well, no. This is the omnipotent God of the universe. He's not limited. He does not get tired. It's not like he needed to recharge his batteries for a go at whatever was coming next. Why was God resting? What did it mean for God to rest? And as we were discussing this week, and we were talking about it in our worship meeting, Debbie actually pointed something out to me which completely changed my mind of how I thought about this. That God's rest on the Sabbath was not a recharge looking ahead to more work to be done. God's rest on the Sabbath was looking back at what he had made and delighting in the goodness in it. At the end of each day that God created, it said, and it was good. And so at the end, he rests and he looks back on all that was made and he delights in the goodness of what he did. So the Sabbath for us as human earthly creatures who do get tired is a time of recharge, but it is also a time of looking back and delighting in the good things that God has done in our lives and in the world he has made for us. So Sabbath, which is what we call the rest, the day of rest that God has given us, is a gift that God has given us. He is calling us to join with him in rest and delight. But what started as a gift can sometimes get used in unintended ways. What was called to be something that was joy and good can become work in and of itself. As we look at the scriptures and we see how Sabbath was used throughout the scriptures, by the time that we get to the time of Jesus, there's a controversy going on about the scripture. There's a lot of, a controversy going on about the Sabbath. There's a lot of tension going on about it. And the people of Israel had been faced with a really hard question. They were God's chosen people. They were the one that God was going to use to change the world back the way he was supposed to be. They were the ones who God had chosen. They were supposed to be victorious because God was with them. And yet they found themselves again and again and again taken over by other countries. They found themselves now under Roman rule. And they thought, why is this happening? If we're God's people, why? And different groups tried to come up with different answers to explain why this was happening. And one of the groups was a group called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees' answer to this question is, this is happening, this bad thing is happening to us because we're not following the rules enough. God is angry because we have not followed the rules. And so the way to make sure that we get to the place where we're supposed to be and everything becomes the way it's supposed to be is everyone has got to follow the rules. And key among those rules was the rule of Sabbath. No one is allowed to work on the Sabbath day. Now, at that time, their understanding of the Sabbath was actually, it would have been like from sundown on Friday into sundown on Saturday. So they were really big on enforcing everyone's got to follow these rules. And it's not just about your own salvation is at stake. The entire nation's salvation is at stake if you don't follow these rules. And so again and again, we see Jesus bumping into these rules about the Sabbath day because Jesus didn't follow all of the rules that they kept putting around it. Because not only did they have the rule that was, in the Ten Commandments, keep the Sabbath and keep it holy, they would say, well, how do we do that? Let's make more rules to explain how to do that. And they would put rules on top of the rules on top of the rules. So now not only can you not work on that day, they had measured down to how many steps you could take from your house before it was considered work. We had rules about, what food could be prepared and what food couldn't be prepared on that day. We had rules of, and they just expanded on this. And then Jesus came and he did things that seemed to go against those rules. Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. Well, healing is work. How dare you heal on the Sabbath day? And Jesus is like, they're sick. But to them, the following of the rule became more important than the mercy and compassion for a person who was hurt. And what was meant as a gift instead became a burden, and sometimes even a weapon. And so in Mark chapter 2, we see one of these confrontations. Sorry, I gotta pull it up on my phone here. Do we have it on the screen yet? Nope, still don't have it on the screen. All right. Oh, thanks. I just found it. Okay, so Mark chapter 2, verses 23 to 28. Since we don't have it on the screen, you will find it in your bulletin, handily printed out. One Sabbath day, he was walking through, this is Jesus we're talking of, he was walking through a field of ripe grain. As his disciples made a path, they pulled off heads of grain. And the Pharisees told on them to Jesus. Jesus, look, your disciples are breaking the Sabbath rules. Jesus said, really? Haven't you ever read that what David did when he was hungry, along with those who were with him? How he entered the sanctuary and ate fresh bread off the altar, with the chief priest Abiathar right there watching. Holy bread that no one but the priests were allowed to eat, and handed it out to his companions. Then Jesus said, the Sabbath was made to serve us. We weren't made to serve the Sabbath. The Son of Man is no lackey to the Sabbath. He's the one in charge. So Jesus could have said, no, pulling grain as you're walking along doesn't count as work. That's an extra rule you added in. But Jesus goes further of that. Jesus goes and finds a rule that was clearly breaking the law. The bread which was in the temple, which was holy and ordained only for the priest, the showbread of God, David went into the temple and ate it and gave it to his men because they were starving and on the run. In Matthew, when they talk about this same story, they record another thing that Jesus says, where he says, now go learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus said, you're missing the point. The Sabbath day is not about rules and it's not about guilt. The Sabbath day is about God created the Sabbath day for you, for your good. It is a gift for you. If you're using that gift and excluding or hurting people with it, you've missed the point of it. The point is the God of the universe who created everything values us and wants us to have a day where he can connect with you, where you can know him, where you will encounter rest together with him. This is why Sabbath is a gift. The gift is God himself wanting to spend time with you. And so that from even the beginning of creation, he already planned out space where that could happen. It's like God took out his day timer or his iPhone and pulled open an app with his schedule and at the very beginning said, now I want to make sure that I have space to spend with my family. And he booked out time in advance and said, I'm setting this aside for my people to connect with me. Understand, Sabbath means that you have value to God. He delights in you and wants to spend time with you. It's not about guilt. See, I grew up in a church where we had lots of rules about the Sabbath, and there was, this is what you can do, and there was arguments, which day should it be on? We have friends within our community, even who rent our church, who believe that Saturday should still be the day that you should come together for church, and that's kind of the rule, and we friendly disagree with them and extend grace to them. And, Christian tradition has moved things to Sunday because we believe that it's not about the actual day that it happens on. It's about the heart of what's going on here. We want to extend rest to other people, and we want to make space in our life to rest with God. And we can only do that when we're not coming with the burden of, I need to do more, I'm not doing enough, I'm failing. These messages that we bring into ourselves assume that there is an angry God who is looking at us to see, where have you messed up? And God is saying, the rest that I bring says, I already love you and want to spend time with you. The best picture I have of this, and I am really sorry that we can't show the picture of this, but I have learned about rest by watching my cats. I want to disciple myself to my cats because they understand the gift of rest. I think they rest like 20 hours a day. The only times they don't rest is when I am trying to sleep, when they start losing their minds and screaming at the top of their lungs. And they are very good alarm clocks, usually at about 5 in the morning. However, I've learned something about cats. I adopted a cat who was 1 year old, and we don't know what his background was, but I remember bringing Gary in home for the first time. And when he came home, he was not at rest yet. He was scared and suspicious. He hid underneath furniture. And when he did rest, he would go into what I call the meatloaf position. And he sits on something, and his legs get tucked underneath him. And so his belly is protected, his limbs are protected, and even as he's dozing, he can look around and make sure that nothing is coming at him. Now we have another cat, Dandini, and Dandini has been with Anna for, since he was a kitten himself. And Dandini knew that this was a safe place. Dandini owns the apartment, and he knows it. When Dandini rests, when he really rests, he rests on top of the bed. I have a picture of him flopped over onto his back with his belly in the air and his limbs splayed out in all direction, absorbing sunbeams into his stomach. There is no protection at all. You just walk by and you want to stuff your face into that belly and rub it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of sharp bits on that cat, which will come into play if you do that. But there is a sense of, there is no danger here. This is the rest that God wants to give us. The rest of believing that we are safe, that we are loved, that we are delighted in. This is the rest that God calls us to. When we had our staff meeting this week and we started talking about this topic, the first thing that came to mind as we went around the table was, all of us are bad at this. If you know anyone who works on staff at this church, we are all driven people who love doing ministry and love saying yes to things and are probably too busy. And yet, in the midst of that, because all of us struggle with busyness, we also all know the value of knowing that we are loved by God and making space in your life to enjoy God and be enjoyed and have Him enjoy us. So as we talk about practical ways to go about doing this, understand that there is no one perfect answer. That there's not one system or formula, and if you don't do it that way or that doesn't fit into your life, that you're doing it wrong. Because the way I do Sabbath rest in my life is different from Debbie's, is different from Jamie's, is different from what you may do. And that's an okay thing. But here is some collective wisdom as we came together that we thought about. When we approach the idea of Sabbath with the mindset that God loves us and wants to delight in us, we see it, number one, as an invitation rather than a demand. We focus on relationships instead of rules, and it becomes something we want to do rather than something we have to do. So why do we do it? Well, there's a couple different things that Sabbath does for us. Number one, Sabbath reminds us that our value is not in our work or our achievement. Sabbath reminds us that our value is not in our work or our achievement. This is something when I went through a season of unemployment for over a year and a half. And I struggled through that time because I had grown up with a good Protestant work ethic that told me that my value came from how much work I could get done and don't be a drag on other people, always, And I had to learn to rest and say that this is a season where I don't have work, but I am no less valuable when I don't have a paycheck coming in. And I learned to rest in God. And then God blessed me with a job again, and I was able to get back into the midst of things. But my value did not come from my employment, my paycheck, or my pay. So my value came from the fact that I was God's child. Sabbath reminds us of our limits and our need from God. We like to pretend that if we work hard enough, if we do enough things, then we'll have our life in control and everything will work out. But the reality is we do not have control over our lives. And when we take time and stop, it reminds us that even for all the work we do, that God is in control, not us. It forces us to say no. This is a word I hate. I am a people pleaser. I love saying yes. I want to say yes. When people ask me, can I do things? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I came to this week and I had been asked to preach. Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And then, I had youth group that week. That's normal. And a friend asked me if I could cover his class at his Bible college. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, I could do. And I said yes to so many things. And then I got to the actual week and you realize that all those things you said yes to are happening at the same time. And eventually, Thursday morning, I had to say, no, I can't do anymore. I had a meeting, and I had to call and say, I'm so sorry, I cannot make this meeting. And I hate doing that. But I've had to learn the spiritual discipline of saying no. And sometimes you have to say no to good things. Several people have asked me why I'm not in the choir. I love to sing. I have a good voice. I took voice lessons for many years. I would love to be in the choir. And I've actually had people grab me and threaten me to say that I must join the choir. But Thursday night, my wife and I are part of a small group, and we have a group of 2 other couples who we meet with every week, and that is a very important time of community and connection in our lives. And saying yes to that good thing means saying no to other good things, which in this case is choir. Sorry, Josie. Sabbath forces us to say no. Sabbath gives us time to reflect, to dream, and to notice what we're missing. Sometimes it's not until you stop that you recognize how important the things that you have left out of your life are. Sometimes you just get in a habit of doing things and you don't think about, is this a good thing for me? I worked 5 years doing overnights. And it just became a habit that I was up all night. And I never thought about the things I miss out by doing that. And then when I stopped and I started working here, and I actually had weekends off for the first time in like 10 years, I went, wow, I was missing something important in my life. And I didn't even know it because I was just used to it not being there. Sabbath gives us space to savor and enjoy life. The best things in life can only be enjoyed when you have large chunks of time to do them. One of the reasons I love going to camp in the summer is it gives me a whole week of time with an unforced schedule, out in nature, seeing God's beauty. It also gives me time with a group of people. And there are conversations that happen on day 5 of camp that will never happen, that would never happen if you had 5 single days of youth group. Simply because you have had time and space together. So Sabbath gives us space for relationships to happen, and Sabbath gives us time to hear from God and enjoy and kind of be poked and prodded sometimes. Things that we would not hear if we only give little spaces. But it also gives us time to just enjoy. Sabbath gives us space to remember and to celebrate. I am a big believer in the importance of food and celebration. Sundays in my family growing up, one of the key things about them were Sunday we all went to Grandpa's house. That was the time my family gathered together, and you know Grandpa was always making a big roast on Sunday, and so we would all come after church and arrive at his house, and we would eat a meal together and then spend the afternoon. Most of the other Pengelly men were on the sofa watching golf and snoring. But there was this understanding that this was our time to be together as a family. That was really, really valuable. Some practical tips on how to build Sabbath rest into your life. Number one, it's not about the day. Obviously, Sundays are not a particularly restful day for myself as a minister or for most other ministers that I know. So throughout my life, I have made a discipline of choosing a day that worked for me. For many years, Monday was my day off. I loved Mondays. I would get up Monday and go grocery shopping in the morning, and I'm going through the aisles, smiling at everyone, because it is my day off, and I am so happy. And I would get to the counter, and the cashier would be like, "What are you so happy about?" Because it's Monday morning. But Monday was my Sabbath. Now things have switched at this church. It works better. Saturday tends to be my Sabbath. A whole uninterrupted day is good. But if you can't do it, work with what you have. If you can't do a full day, find an afternoon, or find a morning, or find a chunk of time. Do as much as you can. Don't feel guilty about what you can't do. Instead, find what you can do. Recognize there are seasons in your life where you will have more or less time for this. If you are a mother of a child, particularly a child under the age of 5, you will not have a lot of time for Sabbath, because even when you are trying to rest, your child is not resting sometimes. And I have friends right now who are in the pains of having a child who is one who just never stops and never, and you try and put them down for nap, and they've decided they don't need naps anymore. And the mother we were talking about rest this week, and she was so tired, and she's like, "I can't," and I'm like, grace, grace on you. But as we talked in our meeting on Tuesday, we also had people there who were retired. And they said, "I love this season of life, because I get to do what I want." They are in a season of Sabbath in their life, and they are using that for ministry. But they say that ministry, they are doing what they do because it gives them life and energy and charges them up. And so whichever season you find yourself in, grace on you. But for those of you who look around, and maybe you're in a season where you have extra time and space, and you see those people who are just trying to tread water, if you want to take those kids for a half hour and help those parents have a bit of space and Sabbath in their life, that is a tremendous blessing. And I'm very thankful for it. Many of you are grandparents here who do this as a way of helping your own children through those seasons. Make space in creative ways. When I was working overnights, I didn't have a lot of space in my life. But the great thing about overnight shift is by 2 o'clock in the morning, I was done everything that actually needed to be done on my job. So from 2 in the morning until 7 in the morning, I sat in a chair and watched a hallway and made sure no kids came out of a door. That did not take all of my mental and physical energy. And so I used that time when I had to do a parole check and check in all of the rooms and go around the perimeter and see that no one had gone anywhere. I prayed for each of the youth that were in the facility as I walked through. And then when I sat down, I took time to pray for the youth that were in my youth group at the time. And I read books. I read so many books while I was on that job, books that I have no time to read now. And so even though it was a time of business, it became a time of rest. And I found space in my schedule and day for that. Now it's my commute that becomes my time of rest. When I drive, I listen to books on tape. And that's how I get my reading input done and my learning done. But this morning I was driving here, I didn't even put on a tape. I say tape, no one uses tapes anymore. These are MP3 files on my computer, let's be honest. But this morning I drove here, and as I drove here, that 20-minute commute, I just prayed and said, God, help me while I do the sermon today. And I reflected on my notes, and I reflected on what God wanted to have me say. And I felt a sense of peace and energy coming to me to get me ready for today. Mixed collective and private observance. Sometimes you need time between you and God. Sometimes you need time with groups of people to celebrate God. That's why coming together Sunday morning is wonderful. But sometimes you need just one-on-one, and that's good too. Do something different. When I was working at an overnight detention facility, coming Sunday morning and being with youth who weren't trying to stab me was energizing and restful and gave me hope in believing in good things in the future. So even though it might have been where I was serving on Sunday morning, because it was different from my usual schedule, it gave me energy and charged me up. So please, Jen will kill me if I stand up here and say everyone needs to do nothing on Sunday mornings, because then she will have no volunteers down in Faith Factory. But I've talked to a number of you who have volunteered, and you say, when I go downstairs and work with those kids, I learn as much as they do, and I come alive, and I become energized. You are not working, you are doing Sabbath in that situation, because it's charging you up rather than draining you. So even if it's in some ways working, when you're doing something different and life-giving, you are keeping Sabbath. Choose things that make you mindful and not mindless. I love this thing. It goes with me everywhere. It's my phone. They will pry it out of my cold, dead hands. But there are times and spaces in my life which I can use for quiet, which I don't make advantage of because I am surfing Facebook on this thing instead of taking advantage of that time and space in my life. I love video games. I'm a gamer. Anyone who knows me knows this. I'm a big geek. And sometimes video games can be relaxing, but they can also swallow giant amounts of time, and I will be done at the end of a gaming session and realize I got nothing done that day, and I'm actually more tired. That's not helpful rest at that point. And so sometimes I need to take Sabbath times where I don't plug in. And lastly, plan ahead and prioritize. Try to find time ahead of time and not just find rest in your leftovers. I try doing this, and when I do it, I end up not having any leftovers. So kind of like my mom with 3 teenage boys in the house, if she wanted leftovers, when she finished cooking the meal, she would have to take that food and set it aside for Dad's dinner for the next, when he went on night shift the next day. If she just put the food out and hoped there would be some left over afterwards, there never was. It was gone. So just like God from the beginning of creation looked ahead and said, I'm going to do this, open your schedules, find time, and plan ahead for it. And then guard those times. But most of all, in all of these practical tips, understand that God's call and invitation is not about rules. It's about God wanting to spend time with you because he loves you. And that is the best thing in the world. Let's pray. Father God, you are the good God who loves us and who gives us rest. As we move into communion, remembering your sacrifice for us, open our hearts to realize your love